I also had it. Yeah.
Okay, I just started it now. How do I pause? And you should get a message on the somewhere, I think on the top of your screen, that will tell you we are recording. But I think it's closable if with a little X you click on. So welcome, thanks for coming. I'm excited to have you all here. And I'm trying to remember that if I look up where none of your faces are to my little camera, it looks like I'm looking at you. But it seems absolutely rude because your faces are right here and I keep wanting to look at your faces. So we're gonna try the video one more time and give it a chance and see what happens. But I'm just gonna start rolling. And I am grateful today to Preston Martin, who is going to help read some of these poems. There was a study years ago that showed that, yeah, there we go, that showed that if people listen to one person's voice for more than like 50 or 55 minutes, not only do they no longer hear that voice, they forget everything the person just said in the previous hour. So we're going to not have that problem. And Preston's a great reader, so. Well, Anne Lamott has said that as writers, we can write the work we most want to come upon in the world. I love that. I love that. I just recently read it on a friend's Facebook page. And I mean, think about that. We have the ability, this is what the ability to create gives us. Oh, somebody's using closed captioning. Good. I did mean to tell you that that closed captioning is turned on for you if you need it. The more we understand the tools of our craft, the better we're able to write what we want to have exist in the world. So in that spirit, welcome to the Orange County Library in Hillsborough, North Carolina, US. So glad you can be here today, where we'll be discussing tools for crafting strong turns and endings for our poems. If you were part of the first half of this class back in January, you know that we did titles and beginning lines. If you are interested in seeing that class and finding the handout, both of those are available on the Orange County website, Orange County Library website. I especially want to thank Kafi Allah. A few of you met her when she was on just a few minutes ago. She's adult and teen program coordinator here at the library, and she's amazing. She makes all sorts of wonderful things happen here at the library. But there are lots of great people here and they're all a good crew. It's a great place to be a volunteer teacher. I love it. I want to ask you today to do something to please remember that if you have internal editors that want to be telling you things about your writing, like you're not good enough to do this, or here's a special one, you can't say that. Let's remember those internal editors are not our friends. They're the ones that want to keep us from our creativity and just banish them to a corner. It can be a corner of your house, a corner of the planet, a corner of the universe, but just make sure they're pretty far away from you as you're working and thinking today. And also, my friend, Mr. Thomas Edison, always comes to class with me. He once said, there are no rules here. We're trying to create something. So please hold that in mind. Remember, Thomas Edison created the light bulb, among other things. So he was pretty smart about what he was saying. If you hear me say something that sounds like a rule, I misspoke. Please don't take it as a rule. It's only a possibility. We are all about possibilities today. So your closed captioning is on if you want to try it. We're going to try this video again and watch it flicker, I bet. We are recording. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. And I'll ask that you be judicious about the use of the question and answer while we're talking, because it can be wildly distracting for some people. So maybe consider saving comments for when we take a break and type them in at that point. And anytime you want to put a question in the chat, do. I'm going to look at them when we take a break and then come back and answer them. So your handout begins with a page that says Craft Workshop, Turns and Endings. But since I don't know whether you had time to read the first couple pages, I do want to go through these just so we're all together at the beginning here. So the plan for the workshop is that I'm going to first talk generally about turns and a little bit about endings. Then we're going to look at turns and endings in the first few poems we look at. And then for the rest of the time, I'm mostly going to focus on endings. There's only so many ways that poems can take turns, and sort of many more ways that poems can end. So I want to be sure to give some special attention to that. So imagine writing a poem about a candle. If every line is about the candle, its color, its scent, its shape, how fast the wax melts, if every line is about the candle, if nothing deviates from pure description, you may have written a beautiful poem without using any turns. But the minute you introduce a metaphor about the light, or a memory of a candlelit dinner, or you incorporate a wish that the stars never go out, then your poem has taken a turn. Many poems begin in one place and end in another, and the way they get there is through the use of turns. Some poems begin and end in the same place, although the odds are good that the poem has taken a circuitous route through the middle of the poem. It has taken some turns, and that by the time we get to that ending that reflects on the beginning of the poem, something has changed. Something has taken on new meaning. Poems may have one turn that's more dramatic than others in the poem, and people suggest different terms for these, like fulcrum or hinge. If you studied sonnets, you know that traditional sonnets, 14-line sonnets, turn at the 9th line, and that turn is called the volta. So if you see that word, volta, that is a reference to making a turn. In an article on syntax and structure, Annie Finch writes, and finally, what are the rhetorical turns taken in the poem? How does the poem shape itself so that when one has finished reading, one feels the poem is over, that something has happened, that something has changed? So something happening, something changing. That's a good definition of a poem. So turns are something we mostly make subconsciously when we write our first drafts. You know, we're not thinking in our editorial brain, you know, when we write first drafts, it's the pen on fire, you know, or fingers on fire, and things coming from our subconscious. So in the revision process, we may make some conscious decisions about our turns. And I'll leave you to read this again because we're not going to be looking at revision today. So I'll leave you to read that first section again. But know that turns can shift a poem from narrative to meditative or philosophical or vice versa. They can shift from narrative to metaphorical, from premise to conclusion, or back and forth. I mean, narrative to metaphorical, or the other direction, from premise to conclusion, from setup to punchline, or to gut punch, depending on what you've written. Turns shift poems from one time period to another, from present to past to present, back to present, and then to future, and back and forth. These are turns every time we make these moves in our poems. So you can introduce a turn, a gentle turn, like if you think of it as a Y in the road, and it's just barely veering off. And what that means is you're subtly introducing new information. You're gently weaving in something that fits very tightly with what you've already been talking about. You might make a right or a left into new territory but still connected to what you've been saying. You might swerve real sharply in a new direction, but it's still connected. Or you might make the leap. We're going to have fun talking about the leap when we get to a poem that demonstrates that as an ending. But you can take leaps in your turns as well. And a leap takes the poem into brand new material, unexpected material. It can be concrete, metaphorical, it doesn't matter, but it moves the poem into a completely new place. You can introduce turns by asking a question. And it can create a swerve, a gentle turn, a leap. A question might make a leap. Questions are great for introducing terms. I've done some critique work with Danusha Lamaris, and she recommends that as a technique. If you don't know where to go with your poem, ask a question. And that can be fun. That can make a great turn. So in thinking about endings, I was thinking about figure skating. And you know how when somebody goes to make a triple axel and they miss and something clumsy happens, you know, right at the end of a performance, they botch it. Or you've heard the commentators at the Olympics and they were thinking was going to make a triple axel and they only do a single. That's all they have the confidence for. And then the commentators are disappointed. Our poems can be our endings can be sort of like that. Poems are performance art. So even if the performer is someone reading your poem quietly in their own mind, if our ending doesn't land, if it falls flat, we might have a beautiful, magical, powerful poem that feels deflated by that ending. And I don't say all this to make you feel stressed or nervous or anything, but just to say that it's a really good thing that there are tools of our craft that we can look at and use to build powerful endings. I know for myself, when I'm writing, often I get a really strong poem that just sort of washes out right at the end. I don't know what to say at the end. I don't know how to end my poem. And that happens a lot. It happens a lot that I get something really good with no ending. And which means that I do a lot of conscious work in revision on thinking about my ending. I'm not in the subconscious pen on fire brain anymore. I'm really having to bring the tools of my craft and say, what would work here? So, and I love that. I love that we have these tools, that we actually can talk about them and develop some techniques. So that's what we're going to do today. In fact, I gave you a list called Strategies for Ending Poems. These are the 12 techniques that I want to talk about today. I'm not going to read through this list because we'll be talking about them one by one in just a moment. The next page in your packet, it says several endings to my poem Buttercups. I'm not going to read all that to you, but I thought it's worth seeing some really bad first day ending drafts, because what we're looking at today are mostly going to be polished poems that have been published often by really great writers, right? And it can be a little daunting because we're looking at finished product, and it's easy to forget that they also sit at their desks and sweat over what they're going to say. So you can take a look at this, you know, how these endings have evolved. How can you access the packet? Tracy, there was a link in the link that you received in order to have the Zoom link for this program. If you scroll down, it says Part 2 materials. They didn't label it very well, and they put way too much in that email, I think. I may talk, but they have to give you all the different ways to connect. You're welcome. So yeah, it's in there. So I thought what we do, did somebody have a question? Oh, thank you, Shagufta, thank you. There you go. These people that are fast with their phones can find links really easily. Thank you. Preston, would you be willing to read this long poem, Indigo, or is that too much?
Sure. No, I'm ready right now.
Thank you.
Okay, Ellen Bass, Indigo. As I'm walking on West Cliff Drive, a man runs toward me, pushing one of those jogging strollers with shock absorbers so the baby can keep sleeping, which this baby is. I can just get a glimpse of its almost translucent eyelids. The father is young, a jungle of indigo and carnelian tattooed from knuckle to jaw, leafy vines and blossoms, saints and symbols. Thick wooden plugs pierce his lobes, and his sunglasses testify to the radiance haloed around him. I'm so jealous, as I often am. It's kind of obsession. I want him to have been my child's father. I want to have married a man who wanted to be in a body, who wanted to live in it so much that he marked it up like a book, underlining, highlighting, writing in the margins, I was here. Not like my dead ex-husband, who was always fighting against the flesh, who sat for hours on his zafu chanting Om, and then went out and broke his hand punching the car. I imagine when this galloping man gets home, he's going to want to have sex with his wife, who slept late, and then he'll eat barbecued ribs and let the baby teeth on the bone while he drinks a cold, dark beer. I can't stop wishing my daughter had had a father like that. I can't stop wishing I'd had that life. Oh, I know it's a miracle to have a life, any life at all. It took 8 years for my parents to conceive me. First it was the war and then just waiting. And my mother's bones so narrow, she had to be slit and I airlifted. That anyone is born, each precarious success from sperm and egg to zygote, embryo, infant is a wonder. And here I am, alive. Almost 70 years and nothing has killed me. Not the car I totaled running a stop sign or the Sprinochette that screwed into my blood, not the tree that fell in the forest exactly where I was standing, my best friend shoving me backward so I fell on my ass as it crashed. I'm alive. And I gave birth to a child. So she didn't get a father who'd sling her onto his shoulder, and so much else she didn't get. I've cried most of my life over that. And now there's everything that we can't talk about. We love, but we cannot take too much of each other. Yet she is the one who, when I asked her to kill me if I no longer had my mind, we were on our way into Ross shopping for dresses. That's something she likes, and they all look adorable on her. She's the only one who didn't hesitate or refuse or waver or flinch. As we strode across the parking lot, she said, okay, but where's the cutoff? That's what I need to know.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you. I think there may be one error in your page, the first page about halfway down, the line that starts highlighting, writing in the margins, I was here. I think it's possible that I was here should be italicized. And I just want to mention that in case you pass this poem on to anyone. You can find this on the internet and please look it up. I don't know why the italics would be gone, but I vaguely remember that. So I just don't want to send her poem out incorrectly. Wow, what a poem. And I chose a nice, long, juicy one with a lot of turns so we can talk about turns first. So notice that she gives us a really good setup for this poem, a really good scene setting introduction. Several lines about the jogger and the baby, and then the father, his tattoos, his wooden plugs, and the radiance haloed around him. I'm so jealous. So I'm about 10 lines down, maybe 11. I'm so jealous. That I'm so jealous is the first turn. That's a turn to the speaker's feelings. And she just states it right out. You know, stating your truth straight out is absolutely legitimate. You know, wrap it all in images and it's going to look great, right? And then she kind of, 2 lines later, I want him to be my child's father. That's a slighter turn, but it's a turn to her desires. And it also introduces a new character. When we introduce a new character to our poems, that poem takes a turn. So then she spent some time talking about what her child's father was like and was not like. He was not who she wished he was. And then she turns back to her opening subject. I imagine when this galloping man gets home, he's going to want to have sex with his wife. And she spends a little time speculating on, you know, his beer and the baby and the barbecued rib. And she just she's weaving back and forth between herself and this stranger with the baby stroller. And then she turns back to her own life, the speaker's life. I can't stop wishing my daughter had had a father like that. That's just a turn back to her own feelings. But then she turns again. She opens this poem out. She says, oh, I I can't stop wishing I'd had that life. Oh, I know it's a miracle to have a life, any life at all. So she broadens to this philosophical perspective. And then she introduces more characters. She turns to her parents and her conception. So she's also shifting between present and past here. Those are also turns, present and past shifts. And then some lines about her parents in the war and waiting, and, and then back to the more sort of philosophical, that anyone is born, each precarious success from sperm and egg to zygote, embryo, infant is a wonder. So far, just on this first page, we've had a turn from the concrete image she began with to the speaker's feelings, to her desires. We've twice had her turn to introduce new characters. She has turned from present to past and back to present and then back to past. She's turned back from speculating her own feelings and her past back to her opening subject once. When she says, I imagine when this galloping man gets home, she went back to her beginning. And then at the very end of this page, she goes back to the philosophical. So she's done that many things. We can do that many things in one page. We can do this too. And she does it really smoothly, doesn't she? And then on the second page, back to the speaker. Or I'm sorry, I'm in type size 14 print. So I apologize. I shouldn't say second page because you might not be there yet. For me, I am at, and here I am alive. Very short line. Might be far down on your page, but not the second page. Almost 70 years and nothing has killed me. That's another turn to new information. It's reflecting on her past and her health. She gives us some information about things that could have killed her, but didn't. And then she says, very short line, I'm alive. And I gave birth to a child. And then she turns back to the daughter's father. So she didn't get a father who'd sling her onto his shoulder. She's got her feelings in there. And then she turns to the mother-daughter relationship, which is a new conversation too. We love but cannot take too much of each other. So suddenly the daughter is no longer an infant. The daughter is, a child who didn't get what she needed from her father. She's an adult now. And then check out this line. Yet she is the one who, when I asked her to kill me, what? Oh my gosh. That is one of those huge swerves in a poem. I mean, we've been talking about life. She's talked about some things that didn't kill her, but we've been talking about life, and she takes this 360. I mean, you just have really got your readers. If you can work something like that into a poem and make it work, people are going to travel with you, because stuff like that is just fascinating. What is she doing now? And she says, yet she is the one who, when I asked her to kill me if I no longer had my mind, then she does it again. We were on our way into Ross shopping for dresses. What? We're talking about getting your daughter to kill you, and then you're talking about dresses. So then she's created a diversion. She's taken a sharp turn to create a diversion in order to postpone her ending and keep us in suspense. She's just doing that on purpose. It adds more information. It's interesting. It's concrete. It gives us this great visual of them. And it sounds like something a mother and daughter would do, go shop for dresses maybe, but to be having that conversation on the way into the store. Wow. She's just really playing with us there and postponing her ending. And then she goes back. She's the only one who didn't hesitate or refuse or waver or flinch. And they're going across the parking lot, and the daughter says, okay, but when's the cutoff? That's what I need to know. That's an amazing poem. This poem has traveled past to present. It's had multiple characters. It started with just a visual of someone in the street jogging, and she went all these places with it because she was willing to make turns. And, that's one of those places where I say, that voice in your head that says, oh, you can't say that. that's one of those places where your poem might take a really interesting turn if you said that. So I hope you'll think of it that way. This is a great poem to study for turns. And let's also talk about the ending. Terrence Hayes once said, end on an image or something someone says. That's great advice. It's not a rule, but it's great advice. Poems are made of images, so that's often a good choice for an ending. But this one, of course, we're human, we're nosy. That's one of the definitions of human. We're curious. We want to know about each other. We eavesdrop on other people's conversations. So ending on something someone says, like Bass does here in this poem, it puts a person at the end of your poem and makes that person very real for us. That can make it for a really strong ending. And of course, we are also going to talk about poems that end on an image. So if you have a question, oh, yeah, there's, okay. And you have a question? I can't even see everybody. I apologize. We may have to just do this in the chat, but since I said that, and I see your hand, what is your?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one comment. Is she's not using quotation marks,
right?
And I think the very last line, it's ambiguous as to who's saying that. Her or
yes, but it's not ambiguous to Ellen. When she wrote it, she was hearing it one way, but then I heard her in an interview. And she said in this interview, the interviewer pointed out to me that that could have been the speaker speaking. Yeah. Yeah. But it would still be something someone was saying or thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I just, the lack of quotation marks, which I don't know that much about Ellen Bass, but the lack of quotation marks gives her the option to be ambiguous.
Either way. Yeah. 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 So let's take a look at this next poem. These next two that are mine. I don't usually bring my poems to workshops. I just think that's kind of vain, but when I need to talk about improving a poem through revision, then I'm the one whose revisions I have. So this is a draft of a poem that is unpublished and also not good. I'm going to ask you to please not share it with anyone outside the class since it is unpublished, and definitely please don't put it anywhere on the internet. It's called No K. Mom's too tired by the time aides come to put her to bed. No K, she whimpers as they wrestle her out of black pants into pajama bottoms. No K, louder, as I tug a fleece pullover and pink turtleneck over her head. No K, when the aides lift her from the wheelchair, legs bent as if she's still sitting, too stiff to straighten. No K, as they roll her, no K, onto the bed, stuff a pillow between her knees to prevent pressure sores, tuck pillows in front and behind to stop her, no K, rolling onto the floor. Curled on her side, clutching a teddy bear, I settle a purple comforter over her as the aides take their youthful chatter to another room. In the sudden silence, peace slips over her face, pain and fear forgotten, everything okay again as I sit in her wheelchair and we talk softly until her eyes close. Oh my God. I usually don't send things out for critique that are this rough, but I didn't know what to do with this. So I sent it to my sister, Rebecca Baggett. Some of you know her. She just published a book. And I quoted her comments here. This poem is very poignant and sweet. Oh, how nice. Sweet, just what I wanted. But as she points out, she can read more in because that's not in the poem because she's my sister and had the same mother, right? And it assumes more context than most people would have. She also says, I do think the ending is wimpy, which is exactly what I asked her. If you mean tidy and not very expansive. That's a great quote to pin on your bulletin board next to your desk. Is my ending tidy and not very expansive? Yes, then I want to work on it some more. So it was good I asked. But I wanted you to see that and then see what the poem has become now, because I learned some things in working on this poem that I want to share with you. So again, this is not published yet, and please don't share it with a person or the internet or anywhere. What allows us to dream? I've misjudged the timing. Let her stay up to hear the bluegrass band come to entertain residents at her memory care home. And now mom's too tired by the time aides arrive to put her to bed. No K, she mutters as Brandy pulls off mom's pants, slips on pajama bottoms. No K, louder as I tug a pink turtleneck over her head, wiggle twig thin arms into the pajama top, dodging the tiny fist she jabs at me as I close the buttons. No K, to Brandy and Carlos, hands wedged in mom's armpits, who lift her from the wheelchair, legs bent, too stiff to straighten. No K, as they swing her onto the bed and onto her side, stuff a pillow between her knees, more pillows in front and behind to keep her from falling. No K, a whimper now onto the floor. Carlos tosses mom's dirty clothes in the closet. The aide's chatter trails down the hall to another room. I tuck a teddy bear in the crook of mom's arm, pull the purple comforter up over her shoulders, see her face soften, pain and fear forgotten as quickly as she'll forget me when I leave the room. I wish she could keep my kiss on her cheek, the whispered I love you as her eyes close and she drifts into, is it dream or a starless void? All that dementia allows. If memories are stars, are solar systems more crowded by each experience? Do we connect the dots? A face from third grade, the taste of strawberries, the cover of a beloved book, to create sleep's orchestra of imaginings. As memories die, do her dreams get shorter, stranger, the leaps between stars more difficult, more apt to falter? Horn honk, fried chicken spitting in the pan, whiff of peony, then nothing. Just as nothing is all she'll wake to, no matter who visits, what they play. Not melodies woven into the night's reverie, but stray notes severed from tempo and tune, noise that twangs past into the blackness. So that's a very different poem. The first thing I did to it was make it a standalone poem. You know, there's enough information in the opening stanza that people don't need other poems wrapped around it in order to get what's going on. I want to look at the second stanza that starts, Carlos tosses mom's dirty clothes in the closet. So that's where the second stanza in the first draft, that's where the poem was trying to end on. We sit in her wheelchair and we talk softly until her eyes close. I mean, utterly wimped out ending. But here's what happened this time when I got to the end of the second stanza. I kept trying to write the whispered I love you as her eyes close and she drifts into dream. And I'm sorry, that was just as wretched as it could possibly be. Drifts into dream is a cliche. I tried drifts into sleep. That wasn't any better. And the problem was, I was trying to end a poem that did not want to be ended yet. What I had was a great place to make a turn. And that dash, as her eyes close and she drifts into dash, is it dream? That was my brain shrieking, no, really loudly. You are not typing dream one more time, not doing it. That's what was going on there. So what I want to talk to you just for a second about is this idea of whether your ending, the ending you've come to is your ending, or is it a great place to make a turn? And this is where Danusha Lamaris's critiques came in handy, because I asked a question. She said, if you don't know what to do, ask a question. And that's what I wanted to know is, what is it like in there? Does she dream? So that was my question. And then because I had set this up with so much concrete images, so many concrete images in the first two stanzas, a friend said, well, you sort of earned this turn to the metaphorical. If memories are stars, our solar system's more crowded by each experience, that third stanza. And then the third stanza ends with horn honk, fried chicken spitting in the pan, whiff of peony, then nothing. And then I went on, just as nothing is all she'll wake to, no matter who visits what they play. That at that point, I had overwritten my ending. Once I said then nothing, that was a great place to end. That was a really good place to end. And look at what I did in this last stanza in this draft. No matter what, who visits what they play, stray notes severed from tempo and tune, noise that twangs past into the blackness. Well, that does a good job of taking us back to our beginning, which is one way to end a poem. But I had introduced this brand new information. First I was speculating on whether or not she dreams. And then in this last stanza, I was asserting that she does not, I wasn't saying I knew that she is not able to keep a melody. She can't connect the notes to a melody. Well, how did I know that when a minute ago I was trying to figure out whether or not she could dream? It just didn't make sense. And I like that notion, that question, can she carry a melody in her head anymore? I like that question, but that's a different poem. So my current ending ends on then nothing. And that way I end on a concrete image. Well, sort of. Horn honk, fried chicken spitting in the pan, whiff of peony. Those are all concrete. And then everything goes away, then nothing. So we talked about turns, endings that might possibly be turns. And I really did want to talk a minute about overwriting your ending. I actually recommend in first drafts and revision, even in early revision, keep writing, keep writing, keep writing. If you're not sure what your ending is, write a bunch of different ones or keep talking. Maybe you're at a place where you need to make a turn, but just keep writing and then look at your ending. I used to be in a critique group with a guy who would say invariably about someone's poem, I think you need to lose the last two lines. And that's often the case. We've written past our ending. And often what we're doing is summing up, tidying up, neatening the poem up, trying to make sure our readers get it by saying, and this is what I was telling you this whole time. And we don't realize they got it. They got it from the images. We don't need to sum up. So really good idea to look at your endings when you've been working with a poem for a while and see if you've gone past your ending, if you've actually said too much. I'm going to take one. Preston, would you be up for reading this next poem?
Sure. The Rothgay?
Yes, please.
Certainly. Sorrow is Not My Name, after Gwendolyn Brooks. And I don't know if does she have a poem by that name? I don't know it. Anyway.
I don't.
After Gwendolyn Brooks. No matter the pull toward brink, no matter the florid, deep sleep awaits, there's a time for everything. Look, just this morning a vulture nodded his red, grizzled head at me, and I looked at him, admiring the sickle of his beak. Then the wind kicked up, and after arranging the good suit of feathers, he up and took off. Just like that. And to boot, there are, on this planet alone, something like 2 million naturally occurring sweet things, some with names so generous as to kick the steel from my knees: agave, persimmon, stickball, the purple okra I bought for $2 at the market. Think of that. The long night, the skeleton in the mirror, the man behind me on the bus taking notes. Yeah. But look, my niece is running through a field calling my name. My neighbor sings like an angel at the end of my block is a basketball court. I remember. My color is green. I'm spring.
Thank you, Preston. I have to say, it's hard for me to only bring one Ross Gay poem per workshop. He is one of my absolute favorite writers, just for his enthusiasm and energy. This poem opens with images of death, and you'll notice as you read through this poem, His images of life are mostly concrete and his images of death are mostly metaphorical. After I'd read it a few times, I noticed that, which I thought was interesting. So he starts with these, no matter the pull toward brink, no matter the florid deep sleep awaits. And then he turns, there is a time for everything. He turns from those metaphorical opening images to the concrete image of a vulture, which is of course a carrion bird, but still quite beautiful. And he describes him, he's admiring the sickle of his beak. So he's staying with his theme of life and death here real well. And to boot, there are on this planet alone something like 2 million naturally occurring sweet things. And it's like he just made that up. It's wonderful. And because his list is like agave, persimmon, yeah, they're sweet. Stickball, it's sweet. He likes it, so it's sweet. Purple okra, we don't think of that as sweet. So he's just riffing. But he just turned to things he loves. That's what he did. And then he turns back to death. The long night, the skeleton in the mirror, the man behind me on the bus taking notes. Yeah. I love that dismissal of it. But look, my niece is running through a field, calling my name, back to images of life, turning back to those. My neighbor sings like an angel, and at the end of my block is a basketball court. I remember my color's green, I'm spring. So this poem ends on a metaphorical image. He's not really green and he's not really spring, but it's how he feels, how his life is, to himself. And metaphorically, spring, of course, is known as the season of youth and vigor. So a time when death is nowhere near. So Gay is actually refuting the notion of death with this metaphorical ending. Metaphorical endings are often delicious and surprising like this. You can say unexpected, unusual things. And if you've taken people there, they'll believe you. If you've taken them there, or you can just make that big leap there. And we'll talk about leaps in a minute. How do we find the metaphor, the metaphorical ending? We write several. We write many, we try things, we put the poem away and come back to it. We keep experimenting until something fits. That's my best advice, is just try a bunch of things. Because it's fun. I mean, this is, what do someone call poetry? Games we make hard for fun. So sitting there and experimenting with metaphors can be just a really great time. Ellen Bass says to write a dozen endings. And if none of those work, write a dozen more. So there you go. Preston, would you mind reading again? Do you mind?
Sure. This one's not as happy.
Oh, you're right. Oh, it's Jericho Brown. Yeah, sorry.
Bullet points. I will not shoot myself in the head, and I will not shoot myself in the back, and I will not hang myself with a trash bag. And if I do, I promise you, I will not do it in a police car while handcuffed or in the jail cell of a town I only know the name of because I have to drive through it to get home. Yes, I may be at risk, but I promise you, I trust the maggots who live beneath the floorboards of my house to do what they must to any carcass that I could trust, to any carcass more than I trust an officer of the law of the land to shut my eyes like a man of God might. Or to cover me with a sheet so clean my mother could have used it to tuck me in. When I kill me, I will do it the same way most Americans do, I promise you. Cigarette smoke, or a piece of meat on which I choke, or so broke I freeze in one of those winters we keep calling worst. I promise if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then the cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying, and more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain. Sorry for the stumble.
No, that was great, Preston. Thank you. I have to say, this is one of the bravest poems I've ever read. I can't imagine writing it, or, the need to write, to feel that need to write this. so in awe of Jericho Brown. You know, the book this poem is in is called The Tradition, and it won the Pulitzer for poetry maybe 2 years ago. Really awesome book. So of course, looking at the title, bullet points are a list of statements that are usually used to support a particular position or opinion, right? And that's how this poem starts. It's bullet statements. I will not shoot myself in the head. I will not shoot myself in the back. I will not hang myself with a trash bag. So he's really taking advantage of his title, its meaning in the general world, and also to use it to make some bullet points of his own here. He's several lines down when he weaves in a new character in the plural, the police. I promise you I will not do it in a police car while handcuffed. Oh my God. And then he gets a few more lines down, but I promise you I trust the maggots who live beneath the floorboards of my house to do what they must. So he's just shifted to an image of death and personal belief. So we weave our personal beliefs often into our poems, and that's what he's done here. Seems odd to be taking a poem that's just dramatic and instead of talking about the content, talking about the technique, but that's what we're here for. A few more lines down, he weaves in the character. He goes back to the police, then he weaves in the mother. A sheet so clean, my mother could have used it to tuck me in. And then he turns to ways he might actually kill himself, not intending, not through suicide, but just through bad habits, cigarette smoke, or actually choking on a piece of meat, or, you know, freezing to death in the winter. And then he turns back to the police with this just devastating statement. I promise if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then that cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying. He turns back to his mother. And more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain. Wow. This is a profound poem. So let's talk about the ending. We talked about the turns. Let's talk about the ending. He ends on a concrete image, the new bullet. But he also ends with a technique that Jericho Brown himself calls die looking backwards, which is ironic given the material of this poem. And what he means by that, die looking backward, is that your ending returned to your beginning in some way. So the poem ends on a bullet in the brain, but it also began with, I will not shoot myself in the head. So die looking backwards. As we're reading, of course, we've been on a journey through the poem, yet we arrive where we started, the title and opening lines. Except that by the time we've made this journey through the poem, the meaning of it has changed. You know, he starts, I will not shoot myself in the head. It sounds like he's saying ways he will not commit suicide. But by the end, we understand that he's leaving testimony that if he's found dead, he didn't do it himself. So by the end, we understand more than we did at the beginning because of the turns the poem made. We're at the same place, but the meaning of the poem has changed. There are lots and lots of poems out there that die looking backward, that end by reflecting on the title and opening lines. So you'll see this a lot. And think about what an advantage that gives you as a writer. What happens when people read an ending that reflects on the beginning, at least what I do, I end up going back and reading the poem again. So if that's an ending that works for your poem, you've probably just kicked your reader into reading it twice, which is great, right? We want people to read our work and we want them to read it deeply. And if you are a person who does not care about readers, I understand that too. I still also understand wanting to make your poems as strong as you possibly can. So don't feel like you're not welcome in this workshop because you aren't interested in an audience. There are people who love to write and could care less about sharing their work with the world. I want to look at a poem by my sister, Rebecca Baggett. This poem, I mentioned it in our first workshop on titles and opening lines. And I bring it to you here in full, in part because of that thing about readers. So this poem has, I said in the last workshop, it has had long legs. She first published this in the 80s when her children were small. And this poem is still on the internet. People request it for anthologies. Some people just put it on their blogs. You can find it in several places last I looked. This poem has really done its work. So that's exciting. It might be a good one to study if you're interested in that sort of thing. Testimony for my daughters. I want to tell you that the world is still beautiful. I tell you that despite children raped on city streets, shot down in schoolrooms, despite the slow poison seeping from old and hidden sins into our air, soil, water, despite the thinning film that encloses our aching world, despite my own terror and despair. I want you to look again and again, to recognize the tender grasses curled like a baby's fine hairs around your fingers as a recurring miracle, to see that the river rocks shine like God, that the crisp voices of the orange and gold October leaves are laughing at death. I want you to look beneath the grass to note the fragile hieroglyphs of ant, snail, beetle. I want you to understand that you are no more and no less necessary than the brown recluse, the ruby-throated hummingbird, the humpback whale, the profligate mimosa. I want to say, like Neruda, that I am waiting for a great and common tenderness, that I still believe we are capable of attention, that anyone who notices the world must want to save it. I still love this poem. And of course, these kids, one of them's turning 38 in a couple days, tomorrow, actually. Love this poem. So the first two stanzas are written using a blend of concrete and metaphorical images, some terrible things that happen in the world, some of the great beauty of the natural world. There's one line that's a turn to the speaker's feelings. There's a reference to God. That's the first two stanzas. At the end of the second stanza, the speaker makes a turn to the philosophical belief that her daughters are no more and no less necessary than the brown recluse, the ruby-throated hummingbird, the humpback whale, the profligate mimosa. That's a personal belief she's turning to. Then she turns back to, then in the third stanza, she introduces a new character, makes a turn to the poet Neruda as a way to turn to an ending. So she quotes Neruda, I am waiting for a great and common tenderness. And then she says that I still believe we are capable of attention, that anyone who notices the world must want to save it. So this is an ending I call a declaration of the speaker's belief or personal truth. Lots and lots of poems in this way. This is not the truth with a capital T, but it's a personal truth. It's her belief. This is a fairly common way to end a poem because we often write in order to express something important to us. So if you've written a poem that has this kind of ending, congratulations. If you've written a poem and you're not sure what to do with the ending, look at the poem and see if there's something you really still want to say. There's something that you really want to get out of yourself that you need to say to the world. And that would be a great way to do it. Just state your personal truth. I was in a workshop once with Joe Millar, and he said, state your truth straight out, then put some images around them. So what he was suggesting to us is that there's room in our poems for these philosophical beliefs and personal beliefs and stuff, but we also want to support them with lots of concrete and metaphorical images, real visceral sensory images. So yes, otherwise it's a treatise. If it's all just things we believe Actually, that could be an interesting poem too, but I'm big on concrete images and metaphorical ones, so I was really in tune with what he was saying.
Doesn't this read an awful lot like, Maggie Smith must have at least had this in mind when she wrote Good Bones,
Oh,
10, 15 years later.
yeah, he's referring to a poem called Good Bones by Maggie Smith. It's on the internet. You can find it. People often, like, especially if you're reflecting on your children and the kind of world you want for your children, there's going to be a lot of passionate personal belief in that. And the way we stay out of gushy sentimentality or sort of just verbal panic over the state of the world, the way we stay out of that is by putting in plenty of concrete grounding images. So if you go look at Maggie Smith's poem, you'll see that she has done that too. Well, I want us to pause here because I also believe in 5-minute breaks. You guys have been sitting for almost an hour now. So why don't we come back at about 2:34 and I'll see you in just a few. Welcome back. If you got a quick moment to stretch your legs. We're going to look at this very short poem by Anya Krugovoy Silver. Everything is perfect. If my cancer recurs, if I vomit from chemo, help me follow the one who knew she was dying, who turned to the man wiping clean her face and said, everything is perfect. Scrape me like a nutmeg, Lord. Release my fragrance in memory of Akiko. This poem just blew me away the first time I read it. Such a tiny little poem. The title sets up an expectation. Everything is perfect. And we get that immediate reversal in the first line. Cancer, vomiting, chemo. How is this perfect? And then in the second stanza, she weaves in these two new characters and someone who knows she's dying. And then we find in the next single line stanza that the title is a quote from the woman who was dying. Everything is perfect. So her courage, it's showing up that way. Then we get this next stanza. Scrape me like a nutmeg, Lord. Release my fragrance. That's the stanza that did it. Oh my gosh. This is the ending that's known as the leap, which in this poem begins in the penultimate line with scrape me like a nutmeg. A leap occurs when the ending hasn't been set up by what comes before. We don't have an expectation of this from something else that's been said. We can't see it coming. Leaps can be breathtaking, and well-landed leaps often meet Stephen Dobbins' criteria of an ending that's surprising and inevitable. Boy, if you can accomplish a surprising and inevitable ending, those are just wonderful. Those are the ones where we read a poem and we read the last line and we just sigh. It's like, it's so perfect. It's utterly right for the poem. So we can make leaps to all sorts of places: concrete images, metaphorical images, questions, something someone said. This poem's last stanza relies on metaphorical images. Scrape me like a nutmeg, Lord. So the leap is into the spiritual territory of request or prayer to, in this case, the Christian Lord. The image is made especially powerful by its appeal to the senses, our sense of smell. And then we have the last, this scrape me like a nutmeg, release my fragrance. And in its request, the speaker's request to be scraped, that's not something we normally ask for. She isn't asking for this not to hurt. She's asking to be opened by the experience, release my fragrance. What an incredible, this is one of those triple axle endings. She really landed this one, I think. Just a beautiful and such a tiny little poem. Anya Silver passed away a few years ago. I believe she was in her 40s from breast cancer. She has some beautiful books out if you want to read them. The 93rd Name of God is one that I really love. Oh, I've got All Reverse. Preston, I was going to let you read that one, and then Stephen Dunn. Maybe I'll read this one, and maybe you can do Stephen Dunn. That's a great one. High Desert, New Mexico. Temple of the Rattlesnake's religion, deluge and heat surge, crutch of the atom's rupture. Night blackens like a violin and bright flower falls from the kitchens of heaven. This is where the seams begin to loosen, where you can walk for miles in any direction, rabbit, lizard, raven, insect drone, and almost forget the shame of being human. Smoke tree, sage, not everything is broken. Horses appear at this remote cabin to stand outside and wait for you to come with a single apple. Abandon your despair, you who enter here forsaken. The wind is saying something. Listen. I just love this little poem by Kim Adenizio. She and Dorian Locks have a craft book. It's old now, but it's still, I believe, in print and very good, called The Poet's Companion. If you like craft books, I loved that one. It's one of my favorites. So we have a poem that the title grounds us. It gives us a setting, and we start bringing our images of the desert to mind. High Desert, New Mexico. And then the poem opens with images and metaphorical temple of the rattlesnake's religion, not just home of rattlesnakes, but the temple of the rattlesnake's religion. And then deluge and heat surge, crutch of the atom's rupture. And then she says, when she says, this is where the seams begin to loosen. She has turned to the speaker's personal beliefs and truths. And then she turns back, where you can walk for miles in any direction, rabbit, lizard, raven, insect, drone, more images, and then back to beliefs, personal beliefs. Almost forget the shame of being human, that the desert is a place where you can do that. That's a personal belief. And then more images, smoke tree, sage, and then another belief. Not everything is broken. The weaving here is just beautiful, just beautiful. And then we have the horse that waits for you to come with a single apple. That's a very concrete image there. And then this next line, abandon your despair, you who enter here forsaken. That is a reversal of the line, abandon hope, all ye who enter here, which comes from Dante's Inferno, which is a saying that lots of people know without knowing where it comes from. And that's what sets up the closing line. It reverses our notion of the desert as a place of despair. Abandon your despair, you who enter here forsaken. The wind is saying something. Listen. So she's asking us to feel the desert in a different way than we often think of it. And that line, those last lines, use direct address to the reader as they're ending. She has turned to us and is speaking directly. The wind is saying something. Listen. So to me, her poem uses two types of our endings, ending on a declaration of the speaker's belief or personal truth, but also ending on direct address. So it's sometimes the case that our endings are doing more than one type of work in the poem. And please know that I sort of made up these categories in order to create tools for us, and they in no way bind or restrict you. There are no rules here. We're not obliged to stick with one type of ending. Also note that the length of a poem in no way determines which ending you should choose. So we had two very short poems. The metaphorical leap in Everything is Perfect, that could as easily have come at the end of a 3-page poem. This direct address ending, same thing, could have come at the end of a very long poem. So you're not tied to anything. So direct address, that's very useful when you have something you want to assert, insist on. You know, it's a belief or personal truth you really want to say straight out to somebody. You turn and speak to you may have been speaking to your reader all along. You may have been using direct address all through the poem, or maybe not. But you can use it definitely at the as your ending. Preston, would you read for us?
And so,
Yes, please.
okay, and then you can explain the ending on and so. I look forward to that.
Oh, okay.
And so you call your best friend who's away just to hear his voice, but forget his recording concludes with "have a nice day." Thank you, but I have other plans. You're always tempted to respond as an old lady once did, the clerk in the liquor store, unable to laugh. Always tempted. What a sad combination of words. And so you take a walk in the neighborhood where the rhododendrons are out, and also some yellow things, and lilacs remind you of a song by Nina Simone. "Where's My Love" is the refrain. Up near Gravel Hill, 2 fidgety deer cross the road, whitetails, exactly where the week before a red fox made a more confident dash. Now and then the world rewards, and so you make, on your way back, past the careful lawns, the drowsy backyards, knowing the soul on its own is helpless, asleep in the hollows of its rigging, waiting to be stirred.
So that one puzzles you. Okay, this one is a fun poem to me. So it's a narrative poem written in the second person, you. The speaker is referring to himself as you. So he calls a friend, gets an answer machine, then makes a turn to a past memory of a woman in a liquor store. Then he turns back to the present tense when he takes a walk through the neighborhood and describes what he's seeing: rhododendrons, some yellow things, lilacs, 2 white-tailed deer. Then he turns back to the past for just a moment, remembering a red fox he saw the week before. So we're seeing all these things through the speaker's eyes. But then he suddenly turns meditative, reflecting on the soul. Now and then the world rewards, and so you make your way back past the careful lawns, the drowsy backyards, knowing the soul on its own is helpless, asleep in the hollows of its rigging, waiting to be stirred. So notice that when the speaker talks about the soul, he doesn't say past the careful lawns, the drowsy backyards, knowing your soul on its own is helpless. All along, Stephen Dunn has been writing in second person singular, but here he says the soul. So the poem widens to include all of humanity, or anything with a soul, right? The soul. So this is what I call a river to the sea ending. When a river reaches the sea, it's a small body of water that joins the wide expanse of the ocean. This whole poem was about the speaker and his neighborhood and his personal memories until the very end, when he widened his view to include the rest of humanity. To me, this is an especially useful way to end a poem when we're writing about ourselves. So what was Dunn going to say next if he stayed solely with the speaker's experiences? And so you make your way back past the careful lawns, the drowsy backyards, into the house where you make a tomato sandwich. Sorry, it's just not as interesting. To me, it can be hard to land a poem about the self for exactly that reason. We're not necessarily that scintillating, at least I'm not. And sometimes I start a poem about myself, but then I wind up stuck. So I need to go somewhere that enlarges the poem, that gives it a deeper meaning, that makes it meaningful for a lot of people. Otherwise, I'm just pointing a mirror at myself and saying, I hope you find me really fascinating. And, I don't feel fascinating. So the river to the sea ending is a really good way to get unstuck, to go from speaking about yourself to saying something more general about humanity. And it works for subjects other than the self, of course. If you find yourself writing particularly about a narrow or tightly focused topic, widening out at the end and taking in more. This is also a declaration of belief or a personal truth, just like in the way my sister ended her poem Testimony. This is the speaker's personal truth. The soul on its own is helpless, asleep in the hollows of its rigging, waiting to be stirred. Do we know exactly what he meant by that? Maybe not. The soul on its own is helpless. I think, to me, what it reflects is a notion of a person who's feeling a little lonely. So it reflects on the beginning lines. He called a friend who's away just to hear his voice. That's somebody who's a little bit lonely. You don't call answer machines unless you're missing somebody. So I think that's, that's part of what's going on here, the soul on its own, as opposed to the soul in company of other people. So I think that's a little bit of what's going on here for him. And
May I say one thing about the ending?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I mean, you're right. You're right about everything that you've said here. But again, just I've done, and his sleep in the hollow, the soul, asleep in the hollows of, I don't know what that means, but the rigging makes me think it's a ship, make me think of the soul as a ship that's just going to now go up or whatever. And it's like exaltation, or it's, he just leaves me with my head exploding here at the end. I mean, it's just so, I think, crafty and wonderful with the image. So I don't know what it means, but it moves me, is what I'm saying. So.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting that he chose to asleep in the hollows of its rigging. It does sound like a ship, like each of us is a ship sailing through the world. And he's been sailing through his neighborhood. That's the best interpretation I have. I'm a little, it's like, why did he go to a ship? Well, it's the image that came to this writer. It's a metaphor. He went to a metaphor. He may have written a dozen and decided he liked this best. Yeah, it's we don't always have a complete explanation. Is there something that maybe would have hewed closer to the theme of what's going on in the poem? The soul on its own is helpless, asleep in the branches of a tree. I don't know, but he went where it took him, and I just think it's a beautiful poem for that.
Indeed,
So
indeed.
Sorry, Preston. Yeah.
No, indeed, it is. It just,
No,
that's why he won the Pulitzer, because he can do stuff like this.
He can do stuff like this. Well, that's the idea, the river to the sea. You'll see it in a lot of poems that are, when an especially good writer is writing about themselves, they kind of understand that just keeping the mirror pointed at themselves, you kind of run out of steam. So it's a great way to revive a poem when you're running out of steam. Maybe your poems about yourselves go better than mine do. Maybe that's and if they do, congratulations. I have to think of things to do when I start about myself. So let's look at Matthew Olsman's poem. His title, you'll notice, does a lot of work here for this very small poem. Letter to the person who carved his initials into the oldest living longleaf pine in North America, Southern Pines, North Carolina. Tell me what it's like to live without curiosity, without awe, to sail on clear water, rolling your eyes at the kelp reef swaying beneath you, ignoring the flicker of mermaid scales in the mist, looking at the world and feeling only boredom. To stand on the precipice of some wild valley, the eagle circling, a herd of caribou booming below, and to yawn with indifference. To discover something primordial and holy. To have the smell of the earth welcome you to everywhere. To take it all in, and then to reach for your knife. Oh, Olsman is good. I've read some great things. I did a workshop back in the winter about poems of beauty, humor, and hope, and he has one called Mountain Dew Commercial Disguised as a Love Poem. if you want to read it. It's just a ton of fun, that poem. So this one's less fun. It's a very serious poem. And it begins with an assumption of what it's like in the mind of the person who committed this stupidity. Tell me what it's like to live without curiosity, without awe. Then we get these grand images of nature, the kelp reefs, the flicker of mermaid scales in the mist, this fanciful image. And this person's yawning with indifference, could care less. And then we get, wild valley, eagles, caribou, no, not indifferent, not interested. And then the turn to the tree, which this is the speaker's belief about the tree, to discover something primordial and holy. That's a personal belief. That's how that speaker feels about that tree. To take it all, to have the earth, smell of the earth, welcome you to everywhere. To take it all in, and then to reach for your knife. This is what I think of as a funnel poem and ending. Very opposite of the river to the sea. It's a funnel, a funneling down. The speaker gives us the ocean, the kelp reefs, the wild valley with caribou. He gradually narrows to this one tree to discover something primordial and holy. But the person's not interested. He reaches for the knife. So we began at sea, we began way out, and we move closer and closer until we're seeing that knife. Funnel endings focus deep attention on what the writer wants us to experience. Instead of moving outward, it's like in a river to the sea ending, the writer narrows the focus until no matter how wide the poem began, eventually you're zeroed in on something brilliant or beautiful, or in this case, heinous, this crime. This poem widens out in the next to last line, to have the smell of the earth welcome you to everywhere. So it's not really a perfect funnel because of that little widening, but it's that focus on the single object at the end and that singular event that's about to take place that makes me see this funnel effect. The funnel ending can work for all sorts of poems and on many different scales. It's not limited to a single person or object or event. So for example, you're writing about a concert you attended, thousands of people, a sea of humanity. So you begin with this enormous crowd. Then you narrow to the people around you, what they're doing and saying, and the poem gets more focused. Then the band comes out on stage, so your focus is on an even smaller scale. Then you zero in on the lead singer as she sings some song you love. And if you end with the spotlight on that singer, that would be a funnel poem. It's a fun thing to do. It's a fun thing to do, to zero in on something, start way out wide and narrow in. And notice that Olsman stopped short of saying to take it all in and then to reach for your knife and begin to carve. He leaves us on that trembling edge in the seconds before the crime began. He didn't overwrite his ending. He didn't deflate his closing image, the power of that knife. We're staring at it. We can't not see it. It's beautiful work here, beautiful. He knew exactly where to stop his poem. Because of course, we all want to reach over and grab that person's hand, right? We want to stop this, but he just left us right there. I love these poems. When I get to really dig deeply into poems. So I want to say something about your packet in case I forget to mention it later. We're obviously not going to go through all of these today. I did give you some other poems I considered for the workshop, which means they're reflective of some of the techniques we're talking about today, their endings, and they make interesting turns. So I thought, well, it's a great thing. You have some right there that you can look at and see what kind of ending they're doing, for instance, just for fun. Preston, do you want to read this next poem? Really good poem.
Sure, Mississippi Gardens. This was new to me. All these are great. Mississippi Gardens. Slaves, she answers, as I sink my fingers beneath the roots. The knees of that blue house dress are threadbare. She wears it on Tuesdays and Fridays when she tends the flowers. Mowing weeds ain't a time for talk, she chides. I watch her uproot the creeping Charlie. The fragrant blossoms we protect hug our whole house. Sweet peas were my choice. We barely buy those things for sale in the gardening aisle. Don't make sense to work the earth and not feel it. I wanted those thick cotton gloves, but they stayed on the shelf. You got to learn the difference between dirt and soil. Sometimes I notice how the ground changes, denser, darker, moister, a little more red in some places. In social studies class, I learned about crop rotation and how it keeps the land fertile. Mama, what did they used to grow here?
Wow. So just to leap straight to the end, Stephanie Pruitt's poem uses the technique of ending on a question. You know, question endings can be concrete like this one, or they can be metaphorical or rhetorical. Yeah, somebody says the poem gives her goosebumps. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And the first time I read this poem, I felt that way too, just that unexpectedness of it. The poem also dies looking backward. You know, obviously the ending takes us back to the beginning, in this case, in this really powerful way. I'm going to suggest that the ending line might not be a place where you want to open a whole new line of inquiry by asking a question. I mean, it might, but it's worth having a reason for doing that. Remember my poem about my mom and whether she dreamed? You know, how I had written past my ending by introducing new material. So if your question opens up to new ideas, is it an ending or a turn? So if you're going to end on a question, think about the work your question's doing. Be aware that questions really engage readers, and that's great. That's great. You might want to avoid questions. You might want to avoid questions readers would just absolutely argue with. I used to teach garden writing, and I remember telling my writing students, it was a craft class and I was talking about ways to use different kinds of punctuation and varying sentence structure. And I said, you know, maybe don't ask a question in your article that somebody could disagree with. You know, like, don't you think columbines are the prettiest flower to bloom in spring? Because a billion people are going to disagree with you. So you kind of think about the work a question is doing in a poem. So that's generally talking about question endings. Talking about this poem, oh my gosh, what an amazing thing she did. And part of the power of it is that she put the answer at the beginning and the question at the end. She separated them. So especially because of what the answer was, slaves. She's just really engaged us where there's this good tension all the way through the poem because we want to know what that is the question that is the answer to. So she's hooked us. It's a really good technique for hooking people. But I wonder if in her early draft, if Pruitt had the opening line at the end. I mean, I had the ending line at the beginning. Mama, what did they used to grow here? I'm sorry. At the end, Mama, what did they used to grow here? Slaves, she answers. And if it ended there, that the question and answer were the very ending. I wonder because that's to me how it would have come out in an early draft, and maybe in revision, you would realize how much more power you would get doing it the way she's done it. So as you're revising poems, if you have a question, it's really worth asking if the ending line, wait a minute, not even if it's a question. As you're revising poems, would your ending line make a good title or beginning line? Would your beginning line or the title make a good ending? These are questions worth asking ourselves. Whether if we move the parts of the poem around, do we get some power that we don't have otherwise? Because she certainly has an amazing amount of power in this poem from the way she organized her beginning and ending.
But also, Pam, I see that the learning about crop rotation is the perfect segue to ask, what did you used to grow here too?
Yes, yeah. She set up her last line really, 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 really well. She did. Her turns are great. But the poem's not making a lot of turns. It stays in the present tense you know, except for her question at the end, what did they used to grow here? It stays with gardening. It stays with these two characters. It just keeps adding more interesting information, more little details, beautiful details, and then turns to the notion of crop rotation. Yeah, it's quite a poem. Ah. I want to take a look at Catherine Carter's poem Hornet's Nest. We have just a couple poems we're going to do, and that'll leave us some time for some questions, hopefully, at the end. I see one in the chat, in the question and answer. So we'll definitely take a look at that. So Catherine Carter, North Carolina writer, Hornet's Nest. Gray paper sack full of venom. You've watched its dark doors since the last blackberry brambles loosed their grip on jagged crimson leaves rhymed with silver, revealing the soft nest suspended from a slender bar of lightweight hooks and needles. Now, though, when you come with clippers, bear it home to hang in triumph from your ceiling, it looks different now. Swollen large as a cow's heart, ringed with barbed wire thorns, it pulses gravity like some clouded moon, the blind black hole at the bottom, a wordless mouth. First the earth, then its glittering chain of satellite trash begins to realign, to circle around this homemade house, this labyrinth of the female, of makers, one of the endless, ominous, softly throbbing hearts of everything. Wow, so she does a brilliant job here. She starts in concrete images, description, and then gradually this hornet's nest takes on metaphorical meanings. Swollen large as a cow's heart, pulsing gravity like some clouded moon, the blind black hole at the bottom, a wordless mouth. And then she gives us this last part. First the earth, then its glittering chain of satellite trash begins to realign, to circle around this homemade house, this labyrinth of the female, of makers, one of the endless, ominous, softly throbbing hearts of everything. So this is
Pam, I have a question.
Sorry?
I just had a question, but please don't let me interrupt. What were you going to say?
Oh, can you hold that thought? Okay, maybe I'll answer it. And if I don't, then ask it. So she begins in concrete image. She begins with a gray paper sack full of venom. And by the end, this same hornet's nest has become one of the endless, ominous, softly throbbing hearts of everything. So this is an example of a concrete image that takes on a metaphorical meaning at the end. So we open in concrete image and we end in metaphor with the same object. It's an especially good technique to use when you're writing about a concrete object to give it more depth. You know, that candle I mentioned at the beginning, if it takes no turns, you know, can your poem stay exciting? Well, taking metaphorical turns is one way to write about something and give it depth. So this is a metaphorical ending. I put it in a separate category because it was so specifically about an object. You might write about a single person in the same way. It's this very narrow effect. There's nothing else drawn into this poem. It's not taking turns that introduce new characters or personal beliefs or anything. It's this object becomes a metaphorical, beautiful metaphorical thing by the end. You could also call this poem's ending a metaphorical river to the sea ending. It has that same feeling of widening out that we saw in Stephen Dunn's poem, And So. And you'll remember there's nothing sacred about these categories I've created. They're just a way to describe tools we can use to craft endings. But I just felt this ending was stunning. Now, was that Lori that had a question?
Yeah. So Pam, I was just wondering, this isn't so much about turns and endings as well, it is about turns. So I was just wondering, how does this choice affect the poem differently? If you were to not make a new stanza, but you go from it looks different now to a capital, and then you enjam and you stay in the same stanza. I just haven't yet advanced to putting capitals, a new thought with a capital in the same line as something else. So I'm just wondering, how do you think that changes the poem to do that, to go from it looks different now to a capital and then keep the stanza single, and versus to go to a new line with swollen large and begin a new stanza with that? Do you understand my question? Like,
Well,
how?
I think they're just personal choices. There's no rule here about what you want to, about how you need to do it. And it kind of makes sense.
But
to
I
me.
guess my question is, how does it affect? How does one choice affect your poem over another? Like, how does that affect the poem to keep it, to go from the end of a sentence with a period to then a new line? I don't know if that, I think that has a period too. A new line in the middle of that, a new thought in that same line with a capital, keeping your stanza singular versus starting a new line with swollen and even a new stanza with swollen. How do those choices affect your poem?
Well, I would say that in this case, since she's writing about a single subject and her poem's really not taking turns, except there's just action happening. It's not making a lot of big turns. She's not incorporating personal beliefs. She didn't introduce any people. She doesn't, or characters. She's not going to the philosophical till the very end when she gives us this, personal view of how this, this thing is, that it's a labyrinth of the female of makers, and it's about one object. So I think in that sense, having one stanza makes sense. It's a short poem. It's one object. It's not making a lot of big dramatic moves back and forth. Often we use stanza breaks because we're shifting to a new thought. That's one of the reasons we use them. So, and she wasn't shifting much. She was just going into more description. There's no rule. There's no rule.
I
have to decide.
I was just wondering how it would affect the poem differently if she made a different choice. So thank you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're welcome. Oh, last poem. Preston, do you want to read this one? Are you still good, or do you want me to?
Hallelujah. Yeah, no, I'm still good. I'm still
Okay.
good. This is yeah, sure. Hallelujah. 1. I saw you, O God, in the long brown legs of my daughter, in her fingers that shape prayers without words. I saw you when she cartwheeled 8 times across the green field and rose staggering, panting, exulting. You shone and shone like a cartwheel of light from the body of my brown and joyful girl. 2. And oh, my daughter's sweet bones flashing beneath her skin, beneath that thin, taut gauze, that cherished illusion, the shape of you glowing. 3. At first I did not know you in the lank black body of the roadside Tom, rank with blood and fear. Like the others, I passed you by, but I turned back, although I did not recognize you, wrapped you in the warm pink blanket from the back seat. Your blood-filled eye blinked unsurprised at the blank and voiceless sky, but I felt your heart tremble beneath my hand. felt the heart's old persistent music, beyond logic, beyond hope. And so I heaved you into my car, and I drove you to the veterinarian, murmuring, all right, it's all right, it's all right. Though I never believed it, while your blood seeped into the blanket and your stench filled my nostrils, and I prayed I would not have to touch you again. Then your scrabbling feet stilled to the sound of my voice, and you pushed your dirty head against my thigh, and a great purr rumbled from your broken chest, and I knew you, and you died. 4. It was a day there was no pain, though I knew the pain would follow, like an old dog that will not leave. Knew I'd pay for this hour, trampling the banks of the Okanee with a cold skewer of pain through my hip and my knee. But it didn't matter. That was the day I decided to be happy, thinking that happiness may be the only thing you want from us, the only gift you can use. 5. How else could you have seen the black dragonfly dancing over the dark water, the flash of iridescent blue beneath its wings, quick as a breath? How else could you see the dragonfly dart, then hesitate above the mossy green bank as if it gave pleasure deliberately? How could you perceive the green dimness falling between the trees, that antique stillness, then the vermilion leaves, startling, unexpected, like an exclamation of delight? How could you receive that moment when 1, then 2, then 3 dragonflies skimmed over the Okanee River? Except through me, except through me, except through me.
Thank you,
Wow.
Preston. Yeah, kind of beautiful, right? I don't usually bring 2 poems by the same person to a workshop. And especially I wouldn't normally bring a family member. This is my sister Rebecca's poem as well. But I knew this poem did 2 things that I didn't have in another poem. Tracy says that's an amazing poem. It won an award from the Atlanta Review for their poem of the year, and then was in a chapbook that won Main Street Rags book of the year. Yeah, she's good. She's real good. And I just love this one. But in terms of technique, in terms of craft, I want to note 2 important things about the poem. The first is that while some of the turns are subtle and some dramatic, they're all numbered. That's an option for you to use. If your stanzas feel especially distinct unto themselves, numbering them can emphasize that to readers. It's just a choice. It's just a choice you make. These stanzas, like the first 2, the second one is about her daughter as well as the first one, but it's about her daughter's bodies, more specifically her bones and flashing beneath her skin, so it's a tiny turn. But then the next turn, the third stanza, is the injured cat, and that's a complete turn from where we were. And then the fourth stanza is a turn again to a completely different place. So it's a way of saying these things are all thematically connected, but they don't necessarily connect in their material. So that might be a time when you choose to number your stanzas or number your turns. Let's call them that, number your turns. She also, you noticed, I'm sure, repeats her closing line 3 times for emphasis. So that's one of our last technique we're going to talk about today is repetition of the ending for added impact or meaning. So that's useful when we want to give our ending extra power, when we want a thought to linger and resonate, like a bell, it just keeps ringing. She really wants us to hear what she's saying there. And the closing line began way up ahead as a question. How could you perceive the green dimness falling between trees, that antique stillness? But she doesn't punctuate her ending. She goes on to describe for a while, but then she doesn't punctuate her ending. And so we don't know whether this is the speaker who's making a discovery or who's sure of her discovery and asserting it with repetition, or who's coming to certainty. Is this the mind in wonder or certainty, or a mind coming from wonder to certainty? We don't know. It's left for us to decide. And if we heard her read the poem, we might hear something that answered those questions. You know, is this someone fascinated by a realization, or is she making an assertion? We don't know. So look for poems that use repetition in them, maybe even not at the ending, but look at the ways people use repetition. It's almost always because they really want to emphasize, they really want us to hear something. They really need it to get through to us. So, and that's what I see here. So now we've got just a few minutes. I have one question in the Q&A, and then if anyone else has a question. And this is back from Ellen Bass's poem, I believe, Donna, right? From first poem. Please comment on the form with no white space or breaks. Yeah, she did that, didn't she? I remember looking at that and thinking, that is a lot of words, a lot of words to say without making any stanza breaks. But it's just a personal choice. And to her, these things were, it was important to just keep going. And I'm trying to get to her poem to see if anything just leaps out at me about that. Yeah, almost there. There we go. Well, I have a lot of papers here. I think this feels like something kind of, to me, the poem feels like something that kind of tumbled out of somebody. And in fact, she said, I took a series of classes with Ellen, so I've heard a lot about this poem. In one of them, she said it took her 40 years to write this, that she's wanted to write about her daughter and not getting the father she wished she'd had for 40 years. And she felt like this was the poem that finally, you know, she never published anything before this because she didn't feel like she ever said what she meant. So I get the feeling there's just partly the effect of it just tumbled out this way. But would I have put some stanza breaks in this? Just possibly, but keep in mind that a stanza break creates a sense for the reader that you should pause here for longer, that there's a separation of material, and she doesn't feel any separation of material here, I don't believe. But also it says, take a longer break, sit back, chill a little bit, take a breath, then we'll start with the next thing. And she did not want to let up the tension. Ellen is very big on creating tension in poems. And she says, if you're writing prose, you need to give your readers long things. You give your readers some breaks. Like if you're writing a novel, you don't keep the tension up the whole time. But she says a poem is a small thing and you keep the tension up to the very end. So that's her belief about writing. And so I would say that that's a big part of why she just didn't give us a break to stop taking in. Because if you stop, you know, then you might, you know, your mind might wander off a little, and she didn't want that.
Mhm.
So that's my best guess, Donna. How's that?
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it helps that I've heard her talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have a question? Oh, you're welcome, Margaret. And yeah, if somebody, sorry, I asked if anybody had a question, and then I'm not looking at my screen. I was looking at something. And yes.
It was more of a comment, is when I see repetition, and it may be because of my upbringing, but I always think of litanies and religion. And because she's talking about God, that's one of the things that makes me think of, is that there is kind of a religious quality of that repetition.
That definitely makes sense for that poem. Thank you. Any other thoughts about the poems or about the techniques we talked about? We have a few minutes if anybody wants to share anything. We've all, yeah. And I could try starting my video, but it was so hopeless. It'll stay on for a minute and then it'll go. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, Kelly.
I have a question. I believe it seems like I read in maybe some of the introductory material, the possibility that a poem might not need a turn.
Ah,
Is that the case sometimes?
Well, this quote by Annie Finch on that first page under turns, how does the poem shape itself so that when one has finished reading, one feels the poem is over, that something happened, that something has changed? So Annie Finch would probably say something has to change in a poem, something has to happen, and something has to change in order for it to be a poem. I don't ever make those claims because I believe that there are no rules. So I would say almost all the time, it's possible that your poem needs to change in order to be, something needs to change in order to be interesting. But if you can write a poem, I never want to say to somebody you can't write a poem in a certain way, because I think we should all just keep ourselves open to things. So you're saying, can you write a poem without making any turns?
Or can a poem be successful without a turn?
Without a turn. It's worth a try. That's always my answer. It's worth
Yeah.
a try.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Margaret. Oh, thank you guys for your comments in the chat. Anybody else have questions or comments they want to say out loud?
Great selection of poems. Thank you, as always.
Thanks.
And I've got a lot of notes I'm going to be studying. And there are a lot of good poems here that we didn't go over too. So those will be nice.
There's some great poems in that packet. Yeah. Yeah. When I used to teach in person, I would make a separate packet of all the things we weren't going to look at, and then just give them separately the 10 poems we were going to get through that day. Because I would just find there's so many wonderful things. They're just all brilliant. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for Preston, especially. Thank you for that. Was so helpful.
Sure.
So
Sure.
helpful to have you read, and you read so beautifully. So thank you.
Thank you.
So thanks, everybody. I don't have anything planned at the moment for another class, but I have lots of ideas. And sometimes I like to just do generative workshops. I've been kicking around some ideas for that. So since my internet basically held up except for the video, I feel more comfortable about the idea of doing another one. This is the best internet we've had so far out of 4 classes. So yay for that. And the library will be posting the recording and the link to the handout, I believe. So if you know people that wanted to be here and couldn't come, please tell them. And the first half of this workshop, Titles and Beginnings, is already posted. So I hope you guys have fun with this. I am looking forward to doing some writing and revision myself. So thank you for coming, and I will see you
Thank you
around.
all.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you for your
everyone.
generosity, Pam.
Oh, thanks. You're welcome.
How did things go?
Oh, Kafi, great. It went great. It was fun.
I'm so glad. So many
Yeah.
people showed up.
Yeah, 25. There were 25 of us, so that's good.
Yay.
Yeah. Oh, I just toolbar down and now I don't, what did I do? Where did it go? Oh, it made it skinny. Yeah. Is the baby still napping, Kafi?
He just went, he's been up and down, but he just laid down for a little while. And so
Oh.
I think I might probably try to take a nap too.
Oh, good idea. Good idea. Get it while you can.
I'll get in contact with Jason. I'm off Monday for working Saturday, but Tuesday I'll get in touch with Jason and see what's happening with the recording. And as soon as it's up, I'll get it out to you and everyone.
Okay, and I'm